Thank you so much for this warm welcome. I'm actually really surprised I'm not surprised, like positively emotional about this turn up. I wasn't sure if I'm going to speak in front of 5 or 10 people, but apparently there's lots of people who came to this conference on a Friday night, which is great. I almost didn't make it because my train got cancelled, and then I had to take another train and another train and another train and a fourth one to get here, and so I literally just arrived 5 minutes ago or something like that. But hey, everything is cool. The projector is working, my laptop is working. You're all here, this is great. Who's staying till Monday? The same 8 people who don't know me. Okay, so I don't know if you've noticed, but this room has like 45 degrees. I will start sweating. It's not because I'm nervous. It's because it's just very warm in here. But yeah, keep your beanies on. Like there's this one guy with a red beanie sitting there and not sweating. I don't know what's going on, but I'm impressed. Yeah, so in order to make this talk something new, I actually had to do some a little bit unpleasant experience. I had to go through my own talks, and it's kind of the content was okay, but the way they are presented is always a mixed experience. So I had to watch the talk I was giving in Wrocław. I think it was 2018. It was called Super Ain't Super, and then blah, 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 functional programming, blah, 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 Ruby or something like that. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm not talking about the same stuff again. And I also had to watch this other talk. It was called Reform What Went Wrong. It was an ode to mistakes I've made when I was designing the Reform gem. This was a talk I gave in Odessa in 2017 or 18. Back then, there was already a small war going on. The Russians only claimed Crimea back then, but at least there were no bombs flying. It was a bit, it was not so cool. And I mean, this is a bit off topic, but I just remembered that the conference organizers, they had like 2 problems. The first problem was, okay, there's some small war going on in our country. Should we do a conference or not? And the second problem they had was initiated by a handful of self-acclaimed social justice warriors that were claiming that this is a white male-only conference and how unheard of it is to have a conference happening with only white speakers who are males. And it was, I don't know, it was kind of bizarre because I think it was really hard for the conference organizers. And yeah, it's even more bizarre to think of them right now because they are all like fighting. Actually, they sent me photos. I'm in touch with them, or they are escaping from the country and this kind of stuff. So yeah, whatever. I mean, let's not get too political. We are here to talk about beautiful stuff like code and I don't know what else, software concepts, drinking, and all this. So in case you haven't noticed, I'm talking about the Reform gem, not about politics. The Reform gem is some Ruby library that brings you form objects. So it basically gives you a DSL or not a DSL, a declarative API. Let's be precise here. We are at the Computer Science University. So it gives you an API to define forms, and it gives you an API to render those forms, and you can validate incoming data through that form, and you can also persist data through the form into a database or something. And the beautiful thing about Reform is that it works with APIs and with HTML views, so it's not limited to any use case. And so this is the old Rails logo. I didn't want to take the new Ruby on Rails logo because I can't pay the licensing fees to David Heinemeier Hansen, and I think he's rich enough already. So the reason we came up with Reform was that I was working at a company back then, back in the days, in Australia, in a publishing company, and we were using accepts nested attributes for. It's a Rails feature of Active Record. You all know it, you love it. I can see it. Like, I see hearts in your eyes, and people start kissing. So, in case you have not used accepts nested attributes for, I will show you real quickly how it works. the beautiful feature in Rails. So let's say you have a form, and the form is supposed to create a product, and the product has a name, and the product might also have a linked model called variant, and variant has a size. It's just an example I made up. I'm not sure, all the examples are complete bullshit, but you're smart enough to abstract it to something meaningful. So yeah, you have this product model, and you want to have something like a variant being created automatically when you submit a form like this. So basically, when you submit this form, what you get is this hash, and the hash has like product, name, and then it has like variant attributes. It's like super magical. And then in variant attributes, you actually have the attributes for your variants that you want to create. I mean, that's how Rails does it out of the box, and all the form helpers work with it automatically. And it's kind of cool because you run that hash through product create. I'm not sure if it's create or if it's update attributes or something, but Rails basically does it automatically for you. So you get an article with the real name, with the name beer, which is making my mouth watering already. And then Rails also creates variants for you automatically, and as you can see, they have the correct sizes, and they are assigned to that product automatically. So that's very beautiful. And then the problem starts to arise when you have something that is a bit more complex. I mean, it's actually not a problem because Rails solves it. You have this product, the product has a name, the product has a variant, and the variant has maybe a size object that has a field called color. So you basically nest 3 models into each other. So what you have to do is you have to define that the variant model is also accepting nested attributes. And this time it's for the size model. So this allows Rails to process a 3-way nested hash and create an article that has variants, and the variants have size objects automatically. So you have to touch 2 models, like the model class, and you have to define that on the class level. And I mean, this works great. It's amazing, but it only works for one particular case. So basically, you can have one form for every model you have in your app that works with accepts nested attributes. And I mean, you have normally every application has only one form per model, right? I mean, you don't have like 3 different create forms or something like that. No, you don't have that. I mean, Basecamp doesn't have it, so you don't need that. Yeah. So the problem is that this is great in the beginning. So we were crazily happy about this, and people were, I don't know, throwing each other through the air. And a few hours later, you might start with something like, okay, I have this create product and variant form, but I also want to create, and maybe I want to update product variants, and I don't want the same logic that I want in the create mode. So how do I do that? Or maybe I have a form that creates a product and a variant as an admin, and you want to have different fields processed than you processed with a normal user or something like that. And so what happens is that you have to start adding ifs to all your models, because you want to have accepts nested attributes for this case, and for that case, and for that case, and for that case. And the same for validations. I mean, for validations, they at least came up with this validation context feature, which is kind of okay. But the problem is that you have one place where you basically try to define different forms using if and else. And to me, this was something I couldn't go. Actually, it just didn't work for a lot of cases. And it started to grow, and the ifs and else and reject and everything were just, it was impossible to maintain. So we sat down, people got grumpy, people started to talk, debate. There was noise in the streets. People started gathering. There was this turmoil. Like, I wasn't sure if I should join or if I should stay safe at home. And there were more and more people, and they were yelling, really loud. Reform. So we started our own gem to handle forms in Rails, and it's a part of the Trailblazer framework now. It used to be just like a standalone gem. It's still standalone. It has it's not super popular, but it's not like unknown. So there's lots of people who contribute to it. As you can see, there's like this guy, for example. Like, I took this last commit because it's a different person than me, so it looks like a lot of people are working on the project. And yeah, so it's on GitHub. You can check it out. Thank you very much. It was a great audience. Okay, well, let's check some more details of reform. So first of all, the way reform works is you have one class per form. Okay, so we use like object orientation as it was. Object orientation, is that a word? I don't know. We use OOP the way it's supposed to be. You have one context, you have one use case, so you have one class to cover that. And that, in our case, is a form. So here we have this product create form. It's a horrible name. I would never call a class like that, but it's easier now. I would use namespacing and all the features of Ruby and magic constant lookups. It's great. Okay, so we have this one class, and in that class, you can define your fields of the form. And you can say, for example, I say like property name, and I say I'm expecting a collection of variants, and you can see we also have nesting. So you can nest forms. I mean, don't worry about this code. It's just to show you the structure. And what is very interesting is you can also have validations in your form. I mean, you're supposed to have the validations sit in the form and not on the model. You can have it both ways if you want, but the key idea was let's get the code out of the model, the accepts nested attributes for. I'm not drunk, so I can't talk. And the validations out of the form, out of the model into separate form classes. And for this remaining talk of 20 minutes, I have simplified the form a little bit. So we have a product, and the product has a name, and the product has a nested object called size, and the size has a field color. It does not make sense at all, but it was just what came to my mind when I was preparing this talk the last 7.5 months, because oh wait, no, it was only like 2 weeks, because you didn't tell me the conference is happening. Like probably everyone else, you didn't know the conference is today. Yeah, but spontaneous people, Ruby community, it's great. Okay, so keep in mind we have this product with a name and some nested size object, whatever that is, and the size has a color. It's so senseless. I'm feeling it. The cool thing in Reform is that so we have this structural class where you define the form and what the form looks like, and you can use inheritance to create subforms. For example, for an update form, I don't need to rewrite everything. I can just inherit from the create form, and that's a very beautiful way for things like when you have an admin creating a product, they might need more or less fields or more or less validations. So that's exactly where Reform strikes, because we have, I think I have one example. Yeah, so this is just a very simple example. Like I have this update form inheriting from create. So you basically copy over validations and the fields into the update form. And then you can fine tune them. You can delete validations. You can add validations. I'm adding a validation here, and I'm adding a field into the size object, like. So the size will now have color and hex code. Again, it does not make sense. If you have better ideas for talk use cases, please let me know after the conference. So we were. So the idea in Reform was to provide this declarative API. I will say DSL from now, to make it really simple to have forms and complex nested forms, and to have it very simple to have validations and the structure in one place per use case. Okay, so one form for create, one form for update, and so on. So the DSL was not the problem. The problem was the runtime API. So when you use the form, basically. So you have this form, whatever, like forget about the structure. So what you do first in Reform, in a typical update case, is you retrieve the object you want to update, like a product. I find one. It could also be find 99 or something. It doesn't matter. So I get the product model. It's an active record thing. It could also be any kind of database abstraction you want. And then you pass that model into the form constructor. So I have this product update form. I give the model into the initializer, and I get a form object. And the form object, look at it, and remember it. It's 4 characters. FORM, because this is the bad boy in this entire talk. So what you can do now is you can take that form and throw it into your rendering. Yeah, if you use I don't know, simple form or something, the form will respond to name, because name is actually the name from the product number 1, because the product number 1 is wrapped by the form object. And you can also access nested models like the size or something like that. So you just, I mean, basically it's 100% compatible with things like simple form or something. So you throw the form instead of the model into the form helper, and it renders a beautiful form. So that was beautiful. And that's where I should have stopped with reform, but we went on. So you can also use the same form object that I was just throwing into my rendering layer, and you can use that, and you can call .validate on it. And you know, if the params I throw into the form are maybe product and then name with a blank string, after validating it, I can ask the form for like errors, like, hey, give me the errors you generated or you validated, and then there will be like name can't be blank. So it's again like completely compatible with the way Rails form helpers work. And that's again like I call this on the instance that I just used for validation. And I can also say form.save after I validate it. Actually, I can also call save before I validate it, so it's complete bullshit. And save will literally just push the empty string name to the product find one. You remember that the product that is wrapped by the form. And it will also create something like, it will also magically create a size object for you because size was nil, and now there is a size object sitting there in this product. And so that was something, so that behavior was kind of built into Reform, completely non-magical, but it was the battlefield of Reform. So that was the most misunderstood feature of Reform. So, I mean, everyone got the idea. Okay, you have this model, you throw it in a form, you get the form rendered. Okay, I understand that. You have the form, you validate it. I got that. I get the form validated, and I save it, and it pushes the data back to the model. I get that. But how the hell do you get nested models created automatically? And the key was, this was called Populators. And I just mentioned it. It was the best and the worst idea in one. So the way Populators work is, I retrieve this product. I mean, this happens outside of Reform. I retrieve a product with product.find whatever. And the size, the nested object size in the product is nil. So there's no nested size. And then, so I instantiate the form again. And when I call validate, and there is actually some hash coming in for the size. So someone filled in the size form. There is a nested hash. It's like product name, beer, size, and then another hash, color yellow. So Reform kind of realizes, oh, okay, you want to create a nested object in the product. And I know about the size concept. I know the product has sizes, so I will create it. And the way that worked was with Populators. So you had to say something like, hey, size, you will, if you see a fragment, an incoming fragment, you have to run a populator, and the populator is called size populator. And the size populator would be written implemented in the same form. And so it could check, do we already have a size object on the product? No, we don't. So I'm going to create a new size object. So that's basically the magic behind Populators. So that was automatically built in, and you could override it. You could actually do, so here's the populator again. You could actually do, and you can actually do other stuff. Like you could say something like, okay, there is a size coming in for my product. Actually, I don't want that size because it has faulty parameters, because you could also access the incoming fragment in the populator. And you could do lots of things. You could skip it. You could create a new size object. You could find an existing size object depending on what is in this incoming hash and so on. So basically, Populators were, I don't care whether or not anyone is confused now, but Populators were kind of a concept for parsing. Yeah, so deserialization or parsing. Like you have this huge hash of nested forms coming in, and you go through it and you figure out which property belongs to what form and where do I have to create a nested object and so on. And that's all like the magic happening behind the scenes in Access nested attributes. We kind of created names for that, like Populators were supposed to create nested models, for example. But it was misused. It was an absolute nightmare what I've seen in the last couple of years, how people overused Populators, because it's a parsing. People are laughing. It's not funny. Populators are a way to customize your parsing, and parsing is something that no one cares about in the Ruby world. So we always have this like, here's a hash. The hash is actually coming from JSON, but it's a hash. And then throw this hash into the database and make models from it. And I don't know, it's a bit more difficult than just, converting the hash into objects and storing it. So people started to like this populator feature, but they overliked it and abused it in a way. It hurt my heart. But anyway, now you know how you can create nested objects using Reform. I hope you don't have nightmares of populators. They are really beautiful things if you use them right, but let's come back to this form instance that I was talking about. So you had this form instance that you created, and you could throw that form instance into your rendering, and it would respond to something like form.name. And you could also say form.name equals something, so you could set values on the form at runtime before or after you validate, and then you could call form.validate and again. So people sometimes called validate several times in one controller action, for example, to get the form to a certain state that they want the form to be, and sometimes the form would flip from true to false. I mean, am I valid? Yes, no. So because they had the ability to call validate several times, and that was just wrong. And they were complaining about this as well. Like, hey, I'm calling, I'm doing this and that, and Reform suddenly flips from true to false in the validity. And I said, okay, what are you doing? Like, I'm calling validate, and then do this, and I call validate again, and I do that. It's like, okay, but that's not how it's supposed to be. Like, you're not supposed to call validate twice. And then, you also had like form error, form save. People were using save 3 times in a row, and this kind of shizzle. So I started to realize, okay, maybe something in my API is wrong. And what was really interesting was that the internal architecture of Reform was something I was not overly unhappy with. So because the form was an object, and then you had something called twins. They were doing all the database work, like extracting values from models or writing data to models. So that was a separate object, completely different gem. And then you had a different object for parser, for the parsing, and the validations were happening in a separate object. So internally, behind the scenes, when you call validate, lots of different objects were triggered and used. So the internal architecture was kind of okay. The problem was that I was using a separate gem for every box you can see here. So, I mean, validator, we were using active model validations, and for parsing, we were using representable, which is a very complex gem. And then for twins, we wrote our own gem for the database abstraction. And so it was hardcore. And if you had an exception in Reform 2, so I'm talking about Reform 2 here all the time. Actually, I'm supposed to talk about Reform 3, but it's not finished. So the problem was that when you had exceptions, for example, in your parsing, if you wrote your own populator and you were calling validate on the form, and it would go through this massively nested hash, you would get like a stack trace, that's the word, stack trace with like 500 lines and 15 different gems, being involved. So here's like, I don't know, I think 5 different gems on this screen. So it was really hard to understand what is going on when I validate this hash on this form. Like and when things break, it was a nightmare to debug. And also, what was really interesting was that people started to, I mean, lots of people still used Reform. They were not, they were not drawn away by all those funny things like populators. It was even worse. They started to do things like they overrode methods in Reform. For example, name equals gets called automatically when you validate a form and there's the name field, and then Reform calls it automatically, blah, 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 blah. But the thing is, this setter is called in several different contexts, and then you had to make sure, I mean, this is just bullshit I made up, but they looked like this. So you had like 5 different if and else, because what you actually wanted was here, you wanted to call value.upcase. That was all you wanted to do, but you had to protect that code from being called in the wrong context with a lot of if and else. So when I saw this kind of stuff, and I actually had to write this kind of code myself, and then I felt like, okay, there is some problem, and that also speaks for that we have, I don't know, more than 300 issues closed, but I don't think we fixed all of them, because some of them were just not fixable because the design was wrong, and we still have 35 open. It's don't worry about it. We have Reform 3 coming. So so I sat there. I had lots of issues open, and people asking, "Hey, can we fix this and that? And can we, I don't know, improve the parsing of reform? And can we improve the way validations work?" And lots of feature requests. And it was kind of, I don't know. Yes, we can fix everything, but we are fixing the wrong thing. Like I don't want to fix something that is broken by design. So there was this suspicion dawning on the horizon that maybe this one form instance that does everything is wrong. And even though they do it in Rails everywhere, like you have active record has like, I don't know, 5,000 public methods, and maybe that's wrong, maybe it's not a good idea. So what I really like, I mean, yeah, so I saw it in the issues, I saw it in my own code, I saw it in code of people I was consulting. So they were just using the public API like in the Wild West, and they did stupid things, but the API allowed to do that, so it's your fault as a software designer, as the library designer. And so what I finally concluded is, okay, I really like the DSL, I really like the way you declare nested forms. I mean, you look at it, and if you have never seen reform, you kind of get the idea, okay, there's some nested setup, and you have validations happening for size, you have validations happening for the product, and so on. Like the DSL was kind of a success story, as they say in Apple speak. So what I did for Reform 3, so I was actually working on Reform 3 the last couple of months, because I can. So what we have here is like we mostly have class methods. So I say like reform.present, and then I pass in the class, the form class, and I get back an instance of an immutable object, and that immutable object behaves like a form that I can throw into, for example, simple form. But it's immutable. I cannot change anything on that form, and that's not it's its own kind of class, subclass. It's not some reform form. It's some like I think it's called like presentable form or something like that. So it's a completely separate object that you get for rendering. And the same is with validation. So you have this class method validate, and again I pass in the form class, and I get back a result object. I don't get back true or false. I get back an object, and that object again is immutable. It's not, you can't change it, and you cannot call, if you call validate twice, you will have two different result objects. And the result object is something you can throw into simple form, and it will render error messages, and it will render the erroring form, but it's something that is immutable, so people cannot muck around with this again. Like if you want to call validate 3 times in a row, you will have 3 different result objects. It's a functional concept. It's amazing. Like Norbert is going to talk about it tomorrow? No, on Sunday, right? Yeah, functional programming, like you just make the API in a way that you cannot fuck it up anymore. And it's the same with persist, so you cannot say form.save anymore. You have to say like persist active record.sync or something like that. I mean, this part is not finished yet. It's very simple actually, but I didn't have time. So again, like you don't get to call anything on the instance itself. You have to use a class method, and you will get back something like a mutations object or something like that. Okay, so that was kind of the API change for the runtime API I was envisioning, and I was talking about this back then in Ukraine, and I kind of realized on the way here that it's finished. I mean, I actually implemented this now, so I can finally talk about it with confidence. I was working on this on the refactoring of Reform 2, not refactoring, redesign basically. We kept the DSL, the runtime API changed. You don't have this instance anymore. That one single instance. You have like different sections or components in the code that do different jobs, like validation or like presentation or persisting of data. And so, but the main takeaway that I realized was that so a form is all about transformations. A form is not something like an object that changes and flips state. A form is something like you throw in data like a hash from simple form, like a nested hash, and then you go through that hash and you deserialize and parse that hash into an object graph, and that object graph you pass to a validation library like a dry validation or active record validation if you're lame, and And then once this data is sane, you get another data graph or a data structure that you pass to something else for persistence. So what I realized is, yeah, we are always talking about transformations, and transformations are always a lot of steps, and if some step fails, you do something else. For example, in the parsing, you look into the hash, is there a key called name? Yes, there is. So I'm going to parse that key into a data structure, and then I'm going to run my own parsing logic, and then I'm going to set this name value on some internal data object. So that's kind of, and if the key name is not there, I'm going to do something else. So I realized, okay, this is all about like workflows basically, and that's something I'm really familiar with, workflows, because what I was talking about, I think it was like 4 years ago or something, I was talking about Trailblazer operation, and the way Trailblazer operations work is you basically have a DSL to define your code flow, and it basically helps you to avoid cluster F star CKs like this. So basically the DSL takes away the control flow. It doesn't take away the control flow, it takes over the control flow. You only program what happens, and the Trailblazer operation will know when. So graphically, this is more or less like this. And so yeah, you find the model, then you validate, and then you save. And if saving fails, everything else is skipped, so no more green boxes are executed. So that's kind of how Trailblazer works in a nutshell. And so this is very similar to what I wanted in Reform. Because parsing, persisting data to the database, it's always like flows and taking different routes if something fails and so on and so on. Don't look too long at this diagram. I just made it up. It's completely senseless. But so yeah, I realized, okay, I can use all the mechanics. If I rewrite Reform 3 with Trailblazer, I can basically reuse all the mechanics that we have. Someone is already face palming, like, oh no, he did not really go down that road and rewrites Reform 3 with Trailblazer. Yes, we did. And it was the best choice in the last 2 years. So, for example, we have in Trailblazer 2.1 a few years ago, we spent a lot of time on developer experience because people were complaining that Trailblazer 2.0 and 1.1 or something was really hard to debug, a little bit like Reform. So, for example, when you run the parsing in Reform or in Trailblazer, this is kind of what happens when you parse the name and the size hash. You can trace that, and you see what flow your form logic actually took, and it will save you thousands of hours of debugging. Beautiful is as well that if you have an exception somewhere happening, let's say you have a 5-level deep nested form and you have those populators sitting somewhere 5 levels deep and you have a bug there will be an exception, and the exception is visible in the trace. So you can actually see what and where happened my exception. And this is like 5 to 10 years ahead of Ruby, because Ruby stack traces are nice, but those stack traces in Trailblazer where you can see the flow and the nesting, the flow took, it's just breathtaking. And actually, when I was working on Reform 3, I was using the tracing all the time, so it actually saved me a lot of time writing Reform. And it's even when you have collections, you can see which item in the in the list of 5 sizes or something like that, and item number 3 caused an exception. Like, you don't have that in Ruby; it's impossible. Like, you have to do your own debugging and use pry. Here, it's very simple. So that is all coming out of the box with Trailblazer. And you remember this parsing code, like all I want to do is when the form parses the incoming hash, I want to uppercase the product name. You don't need this kind of stuff anymore. You can just basically insert a step into your parsing. I mean, don't try to understand all the steps here, but you kind of get the idea. Like, there's a lot of stuff happening for name, then there's a lot of stuff happening for size, and then the parsing knows, okay, size is a nested object again, so I'm going there and check for the color and so on. And you can basically plug your own logic into that flow very easily. So in this case, I just want to have something like, give me the value you read for the name field and uppercase it, and then save that. And then from there on, treat the uppercased value as the value you read from the hash. So basically, this is all the code you need for this big if and else I showed earlier. And the way you use that in the form in Reform 3 is, again, it's kind of cool. I really like it. So all you do is, like, for the property name, I want to extend the parse block. This is the API currently. It will be much nicer probably. But you basically say, I want one more step there, and that's upcase. And upcase is an instance method, and that's the method that I just showed, that really just upcases the value that you read for the name field. And so when I'm running reform.deserialize or .validate, it's deserialize happens in the validation. You can actually see that in your trace there is now your upcase parsing block automatically included in the parsing pipeline. So you can extend that really easily, because that was one of the biggest features that everyone wanted. It's for, you know, to parse credit card numbers, or to change a date from, I don't know, slashes to dashes, or to change a date into a date object. So you can plug your own logic into every parse pipeline. And then when you ask the past form for the name, it's the uppercase name. So it's like Special, for example. Special is a really good beer from the northeast of Poland. We go there every year to sail, Nerds on Lakes. Actually, Adam Piotrowski is organizing it. You should all come next year. Yeah, speaking of beer, it's time to wrap up. So actually, 10 things you never wanted to know about Reform. 3 is that it actually makes strong parameters completely obsolete. You don't need strong parameters with Reform. It doesn't matter if it's 2 or 3, because the form will only pass the parameters it knows, so you don't need to define that on the params hash. You can use dry validation as well as active record validation if you're lame. I prefer dry validation. It's coming from Poland, so it has to be good. You can use both gems. You can use Reform and the new Trailblazer form, which is Reform 3. So you can use both in one app, because I don't want people to change all their forms from 2 to 3. It's a no-go. And I was just showing like the DSL and a little bit of the runtime API, but you can have lots of more features like coercion, typing, and this kind of stuff. You can even use ROM behind it, so you don't have to use active record. So when you, for example, when you pass all the validated data to the database, it can go through a ROM adapter, and it will create a change set. That's a ROM concept. So you're not bound to active record anymore. And then there's also this thing like, we will have a talk about AVO, and I think that something like Reform would be the perfect backing component for something like AVO, because AVO is trying to mimic like forms. It's a very simple way you can define forms, but maybe Reform would be a good replacement for AVO's own form engine. I will talk to the AVO team later when I'm drunk. And then also, you might have had very bad experiences with Reform 2. Actually, I saw lots of tweets of people like, oh my God, I'm never going to use it again. So please, man, this is like 3.0 is rewritten. We learned from a lot of mistakes, and it's not the same as 2 point something. We learn from the mistakes. So give it another go, because it's a different implementation. There's also beautiful docs on trailblazer.to. In about 2 weeks to 4 months, I will finish it. And then it's spelled Reform, not Reform. That's 290s, sorry. I see that a lot. No, I don't know, it doesn't work with me. And it's open source, so if you want to help, you can learn so much from helping with Reform, because you will learn a lot about how Trailblazer internals work, and you will learn about, and those Trailblazer internals you can use for your business code in any application. So I don't know, if you're interested, come speak to me. By the way, I have shirts, Trailblazer shirts with me, and lanyards and stickers, so there's lots of merchandise, and I don't want to take it home. So maybe buy me a beer at the pub now, because I'm really thirsty, and we can, I don't know, debate your future open source career. Thank you very much. It was a great audience.
Yeah, I got a question.
No, we're not going to rewrite it in Lisp.
You know, and I was going to say something nice, so no. So thank you for the talk, because aside from your natural charm, I really like talks where you have this introspection, where you actually dig deep. It's not just, here's the README in visual form. Now, my question is, because I noticed that you wrote coercion as like step 3 or 4. Now that you've separated parsing from validating, have you started to notice that it's more of a cycle, in the sense of what happens if inside of your parsing you want to do validations and then more parsing and more validations, because that's essentially what coercion is.
That is a brilliant point. So the parsing and the validation was already separated in Reform 2, But it's exactly the problem I was discussing with Solnik a few years ago, actually, because for me it's the same. Like you parse something and then you try to coerce a value like, I don't know, a date string into a date object, and that is already validation, right? And so my idea was, I don't know, either make very small dry validation forms for, you know, like the parsing block I was just showing, that was just, you know, uppercasing a name. That could also be a little tiny rule or a set of rules by dry validation. And if that fails, you could already add errors to the errors object, because it's exactly the problem. And I'm very happy that someone sees that from the outside, because I was always wondering, parsing is already validation, yes or no? Because it actually is, right? And that's kind of, so the first idea would be to have like a little form, dry validation form or whatever, like a dry coercion running around in this parsing step, and then let's see where we go from there. But yeah, I'm really happy that you mentioned that, because that was a big issue I had when I was designing the 2 cycles.
Okay, so as a follow-up, let's just talk over beers later for this. But also, just as a slight troll, looking at your stack trace, do I see hints of maybe monad over there?
We are actually basically we have our own monad dialect in Trailblazer. It's much more readable. It's easier to use. We have tracing. You don't have tracing in monads. Are you talking about dry monads, or are you talking about monads in functional programming?
There was the end success. That was a little monadic.
Well, the success is just. I mean, I can't show stuff anymore, but you know, the operations or activities, as we call them in generic way, they always have one end dot success, and they always have this end dot failure. You know, it's a railway pattern. So I don't know. I just took the names from functional programming, so maybe it's a monad. Yeah, cool. What's the verb? I monaded or something like that. Yeah. So I'm using monads, by the way. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, Nick. If you build...
Dzień dobry, Michał.
Dzień dobry. If you build reform from scratch, what would you do differently? Like, what's the biggest design mistake, if any?
You mean if I rebuild Reform 3 or Reform 2? Because I was talking about the entire talk.
The newest version.
But you're a dad of 2. I know you have to sleep in my talk. Well, maybe I wouldn't, I don't know, maybe Ruby is not the right language or something. Could be. What are you working on recently? Elixir or something? JavaScript. Well, I don't have a problem with JavaScript. Yeah, but I think there's a lot of things you can change, but the right decision was to use the Trailblazer mechanics, because the tracing and everything and the way you can plug and play your nested forms and stuff is just, it's such a time saver. But yeah, so if you want to know the actual answer, just check the video that was recorded. And you will have 45 minutes of pure regrets and design mistakes I'm mentioning. It's perfect. It's perfect in a sense that I don't see reasons to optimize. I should be a politician. Okay, thank you very much again. Let's go to the pub, because I'm really thirsty. I haven't had food in like 10 hours because the train and so on, I told you. So thank you very much.